because they would pitch these awesome jokes, like, and everybody's laughing, and you're just like, no, none of that can happen. And you don't want to be the puppet police. And I'd retreat into my mind palace, not participating. As soon as they move on, then I'm like, yay, I'm back.
Right. Welcome back to Puppeteers. We're your hosts, Adam Krutinger
and Cameron Garrity.
And today we have Liz Hara on the show. Welcome to the show, Liz.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Well, we're so glad to have Liz on the show today after some long technical difficulties, but we're happy to have her on. She is formerly a writer on Sesame Street, writer in her own right. We've known her for a long time through the O'Neill, another member of the O'Neill family, and was a wrangler for some time and a builder and just an all-around lovely puppet person. So Liz Hara, welcome to Puppeteers.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So we know there's some sensitive things you can't quite talk about, but what have you been up to is usually our first question with people.
I am writing on a new curriculum show. It's very, very secret. So many NDAs signed, but having a really great time. I've been writing on the show since November. They started filming in March. So yeah, we're all just really excited about it.
That's very cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we will love to have you on at a point where you could talk more about it. But it's always nice to hear that friends are working and employed and just making some good stuff out for the public.
Yeah, and actually, I still am writing for Sesame Street. We just started working on season 51 now.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's now. You being in LA, is that something that you end up traveling for, or is it something you're able to do mostly remotely?
A little bit of both. I fly out at the beginning of the season. There's a big curriculum meeting. We talk about the curriculum for the year, and a bunch of experts come, and then fly out for a writers meeting. And that's when they kind of go through the curriculum a little bit more specifically. And all the writers get to pick the topics that they want to write about that season.
So it's kind of like a pool. You get to kind of, so you kind of get to pick which ones you want to work on? There's kind of a pool for it?
Yep. Yeah. They're just a list of topics and the curriculum takeaways that they want hit in each episode. And usually the choosing process is actually pretty easy. Everybody kind of wants something. So there's very rarely an episode that anyone's fighting over. But then after that, we just kind of work with the head writer, Ken Scarborough, to develop our treatment and then send that off to curriculum for notes, and then get to start working on our first draft, which is where I am in the process right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's so cool. Yeah, I mean, for as long as I've kind of known about the behind the scenes of Sesame Street, you certainly hear about the back and forth that happens between the writers and the education curriculum folks. But that must be just a really, it just sounds like a fascinating process to me of how sort of what you guys need to accomplish influences the things that you want to do with characters and storyline and stuff. Are there what kind of consideration do you guys need to take in the beginning to know? Like, in addition to, let me ask it this way. In addition to knowing, I'm going to take, let's say, just a script about kindness, and I know that's a broad strokes, and you probably have something more specific, but do you have that? And then also know that this episode needs to focus on Bert and Ernie because everyone else is doing an Elmo or an Abby script, or is that something that comes later on, or what other pieces do you have to work with?
We do pitch certain characters, and they do check to make sure that all the characters are pretty represented. Usually, like, the topic will be really specific, like libraries, which is the one I did for season 50. But then there is the additional layer of the curriculum. So kind of balancing that, and then you can also pitch, if you want to do a song in your episode, and then they'll make sure that there's the right number of songs in the season. But most of that isn't really on us to figure out. It's just us pitching ideas, and then the head writer will come back,
Does the song
this character's really heavy, so no, that's usually like we pitch, I have an idea for a song, I would love to put one in, and we're really only responsible for the lyrics, and then the music director takes it from there.
Oh wow, so you do the lyrics as well. That's pretty cool.
That's one of my things to do for scripts.
Yeah. Now, and these are more, these are very much story specific songs, correct? Like, these are what would happen within the, So then do you guys also work on, or is it a separate, the group of writers that work on like the different inserts and stuff that happen after the street story?
Those are assigned separately. It's usually the same bank of writers, but there are a couple people that get to work on inserts and digital stuff that don't get full street stories.
Got it.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there any people that work on the curriculum as well as the writing? Is there crossover there, or are they pretty separate?
They are separate departments.
Okay.
But yeah, we work really closely with them, and they are great about pitching ideas and gags, and they have just a really good sense of, what works for this age range, which is so important because as a writer, you really want to pitch like all these wacky jokes, but kids have a very narrow frame of reference. So even though you think it's hilarious, they're like that, they have no idea what, and like a television repairman is, or they don't know what a rotary phone is, so they don't get that joke.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And you're like, but it's still funny. Let me keep it. No, you don't get to keep that joke.
That must break your heart a little bit. Cool. Well, we'll certainly go back to talking a little bit more about Sesame Street and the origins of how you got there and stuff. But we'd love to start with just how Liz Hara happened. What kind of kid were you when, or when did puppetry first happen? Take us back. Let's kind of paint a picture of what your upbringing was like.
Born in a blizzard in Minnesota many, many years ago. Grew up in Minnesota, pretty typical, like suburban Midwest upbringing. Although, part Japanese and super white community, so I'm sure that affected the way I see the world, but got really into theater at a young age. Minneapolis has an amazing theater scene. So my parents were always taking me to shows, even when we were really little. Minnesota has the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis, and I worked there in high school as an intern. And even now, going back to those shows, their production quality is amazing. So I remember seeing a production of Bartholomew Cubbins, or the 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins, and they had all the hats appearing and disappearing using, I think, not to spoil everything for children everywhere, but check black puppet techniques to make the hats disappear. And I saw it in kindergarten, and it just blew my little mind. And I think that's kind of the origin of just me getting bitten by the theater bug. It was just the stagecraft of it was unbelievable, and the storytelling. So ever since then, I was just always wanting to go see shows and make shows. So got into theater really young, and was also really involved from the 6th grade on in a program called Odyssey of the Mind. Have you guys heard of that?
No, I haven't.
It's this problem-solving competition. It's a phenomenal program that exists now as Destination Imagination, but it's teams of 5 to 7 kids are assigned this problem, and sometimes it's an engineering problem, like you have to sort these 4 types of mail and deliver them to different parts of the gymnasium. Or you have to build this balsa wood structure that only weighs 15 grams but can hold 1,000 pounds. And then you create a skit to kind of present your solution. You have to make costumes and write a story. And I mean, basically it was the kid version of my entire career now is just like writing, building, performing, problem solving.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
It was amazing. And I did that up through high school, and actually still am involved sometimes, go back as a judge to volunteer. But that was kind of that was when I built my first puppet. We had a character that was a camel. So like my head was the hump, and I held the neck and had like a little string connected to the mouth so that I could pull it. So my first story, my first costume, my first performing time was all through Odyssey of the Mind. Then from there, in college is when I started interning at Henson.
How did that come up, though?
Yeah.
It was so crazy, and it happened so quickly. I was in a film class with Elizabeth Leary, and she had just gotten an internship there working in their PR department. I think she still works for the Center of Puppetry Arts down in Atlanta.
And she's really involved in Dragon Con as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she was just really excited about her internship and talking about it. I was like, oh, I love puppets. I've always kind of wanted to build for them. And she said, well, they're still looking for interns. So called them up that afternoon, had my interview the next day, and that was it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of magical and whirlwind. And then, so that was my sophomore year in college, and my junior year, got to work on Little Shop of Horrors as my first big project. And yeah, that was kind of how I got roped in. And, once you're at Henson, you never want to leave ever.
So we've heard. Oh, yeah. That must have been just such a whirlwind for you. And so between that time of when you were, you built your first camel puppet to being in college, did you keep up with the puppetry scene, or did you continue to be a fan of it, or was there sort of a reinitiation for you of you needing to like kind of catch up with what was happening in the industry?
I didn't really follow the Muppets the way that I know a lot of puppeteers and puppet builders did. Mm-hmm. I was more interested in the theatrical puppetry. I was interning a lot and there was a show specifically called Shock-Headed Peter by the Improbable Theater Company. And that was just so many different styles of puppets. It's these German nursery rhymes in which the children die at the end of every single story, which I thought was hilarious and delightful. And they just had all these different puppetry techniques. They had marionettes and tabletop puppets where the puppeteer was completely exposed the entire time. And I just was by that aspect of it. That was really what drew me. So when I started at Henson, it was, still everything that I was really excited about. I love building. But I didn't really have any experience doing like flat patterning with foam puppets.
So then what kind of, obviously you were in an internship, so part of the job was them teaching you, but what was that learning process like? Is it kind of pushing you in the deep end right off the bat, or do they, teach you some like basic, like here's how you make a sphere out of a flat pattern or things like that?
A lot of it was just kind of observing and probably being really annoying. You kind of look over the shoulders of all the incredible builders. Oh, what material is this? How do you get the best shape in this? And then they give you more and more responsibility as you go on. And for the most part, it was just hundreds and hundreds of hours of carving foam warts for Audrey 2. That was the bulk of it. Uh-huh. But then, you get a little bit more responsibility here, cut this out. This is the best way to do it. Try this barge cement and try not to kill your brain. And then it's a lot of redoing the bullshit that, you screwed up. And I think that's, one of the best ways to learn. And then at the same time, I was doing my senior thesis project, and I was an American culture major. So they, for some reason, let me do my thesis project as a puppet play. So I got to design and build my own characters. And that was a great experience because I was working on my own, but was able to bring that in to Henson and be like, is this how to do this? And getting a lot of great feedback from all my mentors there. And everybody there is just so phenomenal about wanting to share their knowledge, because really, I mean, there is no better way to learn. Like, there's, other than UConn, really, there's not a way to learn how to do this other than, finding other people that do it and talking to them. And I think everybody knows that and is excited when there's a new person that wants to get those skills.
Absolutely. No, and that's such an important thing, as great as it is for resources to be out there for puppeteers to find with, different patterns and other things. You really do need to be able to have that relationship with someone, try on my puppet, or what mistakes have you made to help you catch up? And you've certainly benefited from that, Adam.
Going to the O'Neill as well, things like that, getting those hands-on experiences, it's so valuable.
Yeah.
Now, that show that you did as your senior thesis, was it a solo performance, or were you getting other people around you to help with some of the puppetry and stuff?
I was not in it. I just wrote and built it, and then got other actors to try to puppeteer. And it was just such a fun time because, we didn't know what we were talking about at all. But yeah, they did a great job, and some of those puppets still exist in the world. I've got one of them and sent the rest out. So some of those actors are letting their kids play with them now.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I did a couple different puppet projects in college, and you look back at those things, and there's parts that you love and there's parts that you've held on to, but other bits of it are just cringeworthy a little bit. So then, what came next? So you were, working at Henson as an intern. Did that then turn into a job, or were there other things that happened in between?
Oh, so much happened in between. I moved back to Minnesota.
How long was the internship?
I worked for my junior year, and then they actually hired me for a few hours building the tour of Little Shop for my senior year. So I was a professional at that point. And then moved back to Minnesota, tried a bunch of other different careers. I thought maybe I would be a lawyer or go into marketing, because puppet building is not a real job.
Can't make money doing that.
I know that would be insane. I did work for V for a couple summers doing Sesame Street Live and other set building jobs. But then after a few years, just decided, maybe try actually moving to New York. And my friend Mike Schupak was working on Avenue Q, knew that they were looking for people. So I got an opportunity to go do that for a couple months. Wow. And then when I decided to make the big leap, I moved to New York and had a couple months on another build for Avenue Q.
Oh, I was going to say, was this for the original Broadway and then the subsequent tour, or were you wrangling on it? But it was the puppet build, right?
The first build I was out there for was the Las Vegas build, and then came back for some of the Broadway refurbs.
Okay. What kind of things did you work on for that?
For the Las Vegas build, it was a new build, so it was, soup to nuts. And it was such a great experience because Rick Lyon's building, he's just work so precisely that I really learned how to, slow down and be careful and just get every little scene perfect, and like the way that I learned how to glue down the lip line is just so much cleaner than it was definitely just, in my dorm room. So just having somebody like that as a mentor was just totally invaluable. But it was also really fun because his workshop was above a porn studio. So sometimes, we'd be working in the middle of the afternoon and we'd hear music and we'd be like, oh, everybody turn off the music. Let's all listen to this. And, we'd all have a good laugh.
Huh.
One of the joys of working in New Jersey. It was great.
Yeah.
Did they ever borrow the puppets, though?
It's a good inspiration for the end of the first act, I guess.
We could have done some very collaborative projects.
Be as loud as they want, huh?
Yeah. It was fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then when I moved to New York, I actually got a job working at Henson, only when they had big overhire projects. But for the most part, was working at Parsons Mirrors doing costumes for Broadway shows.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Euron Sparman was my boss there, and he had been a Henson builder for years and years, mostly working on Bear in the Big Blue House. So he was great about teaching me skills that were very Henson specific, but we also used them for some of the craft costumes.
What shows did you work on for building costumes?
Did a lot of stuff for The Lion King, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Got to do the new builds for the Shrek musical. Worked on the Three Little Pigs specifically, and then spent a very harrowing and wonderful time working on the Spider-Man musical.
Oh, nice.
So
that's interesting. I
part
saw
of
that
history.
one. Turn Off the Dark. I saw that on Broadway. Yeah.
At what point during the run did you see it?
Oh, I think it was more toward the end.
Good.
Yeah. Pretty much toward
because it had already had a reputation, I think, by the time we went.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome that you worked in a costume shop. I actually started off working in a costume shop as well before I ever started doing puppets. And having that kind of background of learning how to build clothing and stuff can improve your puppet building beyond what you would ever even imagine. It's one thing I always encourage people to because I know a lot of builders that hire out costumers to build costumes for the puppets. And I want to make clear, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you can try to learn to build costumes for your own puppets, it will improve your puppet building skills as well. Because at the end of the day, they are some pretty similar skills. It's sewing and patterning and things like that. And one thing I always wonder, if you if you don't trust your costume building skills that much, how good is your sewing for your puppets too? It kind of makes me wonder a little bit.
Yeah.
But he'll still take the commissions to make costumes for people.
But yeah, just being really familiar with how different types of fabrics work, and working to sew together fabrics that are, one is stretchy and one is not stretchy and furry, and definitely patterning and just kind of knowing how to engineer shapes out of fabric. It is a very important skill set. And when I work at Henson, primarily I do costumes for the puppets. So definitely my background as a human costume maker has been very important. But also, costumes for puppets is a very specific skill that is for human costumes because puppets don't necessarily have shoulders.
The anatomy is all different. I know a lot of people that recommend getting kids' clothes, and there's nothing that's not necessarily a bad thing too. But unless you're building a puppet kind of to that shape, you want them to fit in a certain way. So
Yeah, like when you're making hats for a potato, that's going to be different.
Imagine making a suit for a potato. That's not something you're going to pick up somewhere.
No.
Yeah, no.
That is not a job for kids.
Yeah, I had to make a karate gi for an octopus puppet for a Cookie Monster segment, and it was just so complicated because, first of all, 8 arms, and then where does the belt go?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to find that at a thrift store. Not even New York City.
And there were just so many conversations back and forth where, like, do we put the belt above the legs? Because then that's going around his neck. But then if you put it below the legs, what's going on here?
Yeah, it's like that question of if a dog wore pants, would it go just on the back 2 legs or on all 4 of them?
No. Wait, for stuff like that, I imagine they do a sketch first, don't they? Kind of tell part of the story? Sometimes, maybe, depending.
Here's the secret. I can't draw at all. Just, there would be absolutely no purpose in me trying to sketch out a costume. And honestly, with the time frame that we're dealing with, there isn't that time for that step. So Jason Weber, the incredible designer and boss at Sesame at Henson, he'll just come and say, hey, we need an octopus outfit. And it's just like, okay, here are the fabrics that I'm planning to use, and here's kind of generally what I have in mind, and maybe we'll print out some visual references, like, I'd print out the Cobra Kai costumes from the Karate Kid and just be like, I'm going to make this, but, for an octopus. and then we just kind of have to go for it and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that must, can you give us a sense of what that timeline is? Because, I know the scripts are written, well in advance of production, but once it gets approved that the orders come into the workshop to start building things, or how can you give us a sense of what that timetable looks like?
From the time the scripts come in to the time we as the builders get the assignment, I have no idea what goes on, because I know there's weird budget stuff that has to be decided. And, I think they kind of go back and forth with design, but for the most part, I feel like the turnaround is like 2 weeks if you're lucky.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm so bad remembering timelines.
Sure.
It might, I'm sure some projects are even less than that. But I think probably it's 40 hours generally for a costume like that, a specific one-off fancy costume.
Yeah.
And I imagine there's multiple things going on at once as well, because maybe you're 2 weeks out from this one, but the next shoot is 40 days later.
Yeah.
So then 2 weeks out from that is 4 days from the day you started this one. So it probably all starts overlapping too, right? Does that make sense?
It is pure chaos. So yeah, everybody's working on everything, and poor Jason Weber is, whenever we kind of run out of hours on projects, he'll be the one to take over and do all the last minute finishing to make sure that everything is perfect. And the attention to detail in every single one of those costumes is just unbelievable. All the fabrics, them specifically just to get it right, because everything, even the linings that you will never see are specific to the costume. I remember we did this, I think Clash of the Titans parody or something like that. But I had to make this costume for Zeus, and we did these really intricately carved shoulder pieces that were just like Liam Neeson's, and they had tiny lion faces on them, and they were, brushed with metallic paint just to get the shadowing perfect. And then the puppet had this huge wig and you couldn't see it at all.
Oh, no.
It's just like, Trust says it's there. Like, there are 5 layers of chain link fabric all over this costume and all this stuff that happens for his pant tube that you only see like a 1/4 inch of.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I just wish someday there would be like some museum display of all the costumes that we made for that.
Yeah, no, I was on set a couple of years ago now, but it was they were at the end of the day they were going to film a bunch of Grover, like little introductions for episodes, and he had to wear like 6 different costumes, and so I just saw them rotating, and there were a bunch of Grovers on set, but it was like him in a cowboy outfit, and then it was him in like a giant cookie, and I was just astonished because I saw them sitting on the Wrangler table like all day long. But then to see that they were only used for like 30 seconds, it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like, that just, I mean, it's a testament to the show and to all you guys, but it's just insane that much time has to go into like even the smallest of details. It's just blows your mind.
Yeah, that cookie costume, was it the M&M cookie?
Yeah.
So I made that one, and that again was like 2 pieces of foam. The top half was carved to look, with a certain number of cracks and all the nooks and crannies. And then the foam was dyed specifically to be cookie colored. And the back of that cookie, I just spent hours ripping out little chunks of foam with a pair of pliers so that it would look like the bottom of the cookie from the pan. And just spent hours working on it, even though maybe somebody would catch a half-second glimpse of the back of it.
Yeah. No, because he gets like rushed out of the scene by Cookie Monster or something, I think. So wow. No, that's incredible.
What was it made out of?
That was, I think, just the cheaper, not the good Scott foam, but the cheaper upholstery foam.
Yeah.
But then dyed specifically. And then the M&Ms were half plastic spheres that we painted from the inside so that when we glued them into the cookie, the paint wouldn't rip. And then Grover's little head was where one of the M&Ms should have been.
No, it was just super adorable. I'd love that thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
So you also worked for some time as a wrangler on Sesame Street. Did the experience of working as a wrangler teach you anything specific about building for in the shop that you may not have gotten if you were only working there?
Oh, absolutely. Like, because once you see how things are actually used, you know what your props and your costumes and your puppets really have to do. So sometimes, working in the shop, you're like, oh, this prop is fine. You make it out of paper. But then as soon as you actually have to rig it, you're like, this is definitely not sturdy enough. And so you have to really problem solve on set. Be good at knowing how to make last minute repairs, how to paint things really quickly, how to cheat and fix paint things that you'll only see for a second. So parts of the prop are important, like what you actually are going to see. So where to focus your attention. And also it was great to be both building and wrangling at the same time, because you'd be working on a costume and, you'd kind of run out of time to do some of the intricate stuff. And you're just like, I'll take care of it on set, or I'll make sure this part never gets seen. So that sounds like a future Liz problem. Right. Don't worry about it right now. It's midnight. Go home.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Now, that makes me think of something, though. So for an example, like that cookie that you built for Grover is part of the consideration in why you would put that level of detail, besides just wanting to make the best product possible, is part of that because eventually those props might get reused in a different context, and so you're doing a service to the future whoever is working in the shop, so that it works in the 360 or whatever.
Yeah, because day of shooting, like if you have something specific in mind, you might get to set and someone will pitch a great gag and you will see the back of the cookie that you weren't expecting to see. So you do kind of need to be prepared for anything to happen. So you always kind of think holistically when you're building, I guess.
I wonder, as a writer too, do the writers have like a resource sheet knowing about things that already exist too, to kind of write things using props that they might already have, or do they always just make sure they
or even just like a sense of the budget, like you can't have a rocket ship because that's gonna blow our art department budget for the whole episode, or things like that?
For the most part, the writers don't care. We're just like, we're gonna write whatever silly thing we think is funny. At these bananas requests, like, oh, we need this alien costume for Bert, or Chrissy Farrell always writes just they don't really have a sense, or they might have a sense, but they aren't limited when they're writing. Sometimes when I'm writing a script, and I'm trying to figure out like what characters make sense, I'll text Jason and be like, hey, we have an asparagus puppet, right? Because I want a talking asparagus. And you have a much better chance of getting it through if it already exists than if somebody has to argue for a new build. Especially as like one of the baby writers, I think I probably don't have the freedom to demand new puppet builds. So always to play it safe, it's nice to check in and see what we have. So it's polite but necessary. Definitely, I am more cognizant of that for this new show that we're building, because we don't have 50 years of stock props and puppets. No. So everything you write is a new build. And I have a general sense of what things are expensive and what things aren't, but because I've never been on the producing side, I've never really had to care about budgets, and I, still don't. So it's real easy for me to be like, oh yeah, I know how to make this. I know that this ridiculous costume is possible, but someone else's money, what do I care? And then they come back and they're like, "Oh, that's what you're asking for is bananas. Please stop."
No, that totally makes sense.
Let's say you wrote something, and let's say, and I'm sure they have I'm going to use fruit as an example, and I'm sure they have a puppet for every type of fruit. But let's say you wrote it, and it's about an orange. They do. Okay, but they're like, we don't have an orange, we have an apple. Like, will they make changes like that? Things to make it fit more what they have? Yeah. And if they do they let you know as a writer, or at a certain point, is it just like they just use your script and just kind of make best with it? Like, do you not know until you see it?
I really don't, because once we turn in, I think we usually have the draft for like 2 drafts, and then it kind of gets taken away and polished and curriculumized. So they do make changes like that, and we don't know until we're on set. And that's fine. Like, they have to make the best decisions for the whole show. They've got the full picture, and we're only dealing with a little part of it. Yeah. So you kind of have to expect that. And sometimes it'll be even more drastic, and they'll swap out entire characters. But yeah, sometimes they'll make huge changes and even swap out other characters. Again, because like they'll realize that they have, or like a scheduling conflict with one of the puppeteers will happen. So, David can't come in for Cookie Monster, so they'll have to swap out. And, you just have to trust them to make the changes that are best for them.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the characters in this context, because we've talked with a number of the performers on this show, and they certainly have the responsibility of making sure that the character's voice is consistent through the ages, especially if it's someone who has inherited a legacy character. Do you guys have any kind of style guide, or have there been any issues that you've had in learning to find the character voices yourself so you can perform them in a sense for, creating the scripts that you need to write?
We aren't given a style guide, but I mean, everybody there has been at Sesame for so long, we do feel really familiar with all the characters, and we take that responsibility to stay true to the characters extremely seriously. Like, we know that this is a legacy and that we are stewards of these characters, so we can't just write whatever gag we think is funny. We have to make sure that it really is true to what the character has been and what the character is now, which is, a balancing act too, because, we've got 50 years of history, but also we do have new characters that we're working for, which is really exciting. And the new puppeteer also kind of have their own styles. So I know that the writers that have been with the show for so long, I think they do write Elmo slightly differently now for Ryan, just because he has different strengths that we really want to play to. Mm-hmm. So we take that into consideration also. And it's just so much fun writing for these characters that so well, because you get to write to their strengths, and also writing for puppeteers that so well. Some people are just so great physically, and some people are just great with deep emotional beats. So trying to come up with stories that play to those strengths is really fun.
Yeah, no, I was going to say too, I bet you, what an advantage it must be having the opportunity to be on set and wrangle and whatnot. So you get to, I bet you maybe even unconsciously or maybe very consciously, you're picking up on, the puppeteers themselves, kind of like what you were saying, but it might give you inspiration that you might not have gotten if you were just writing in a room remotely, just going off of, like watching past episodes or whatever. You get a really whole nother perspective, and maybe even think like, hey, you know what? Like, this is something I bet you Matt would really have a lot of fun doing, or this is something Ryan would probably really have a lot of fun doing. Beyond just also, what's good for the characters.
Absolutely. And, just having these conversations with puppeteers, like when Jen Barnhart inherited the role of Zoe, talking to her about what she thought the character was and what new directions she wanted to take it. Just knowing things that she really wanted to explore gave us just a ton of information on what we could do.
Was that a formal meeting that you had with her, or that was had with her, or was it just kind of a?
No, that was just talking with her because they're so thoughtful about every choice that they make. So it's definitely something that we all want to talk about. This is how puppeteers socialize.
Yeah. No, I know how that goes for sure. Yeah, no, I remember a couple of years, that same time that I was on the set and I saw that cookie that you made, I was applying to be a writer on the show, not knowing that when you go in for a meeting like that, you don't bring scripts for Sesame Street, which was I should have known that, but I didn't.
Yeah.
But in that process, I wrote a script for Grover and what would have been Stephen Colbert, and I just remember I can't do the Grover voice to save my life or anything like that, but to be able to access that character still on the page, and it connects you to the character in a really interesting way, and you realize how much you know about them is really cool. So it must be a great experience for all of the writers to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Then moving to this new show that you're working on, it must be a different kind of challenge because there, like you said, it's not a show with 50 years of history. So what are the new kind of challenges that you're encountering as you write and script this new program?
So it's been such a fascinating process because we started writing in November. So we, as the writers, were trying to figure out each character's voice. And then the actual auditions weren't until, what is it? Maybe January or February, I think.
Okay.
So we were writing without having any idea really of who the performers were. And I think even at that point, there were still questions about the actual design of some of the characters. Kind of having no idea even what some of them looked like was really difficult.
Sure.
And when we're writing in the room, we'll kind of pitch jokes in the character's voice. So we had a sense of what the character is for so long. And then the auditions happened, and it's just like, oh, that person either matches exactly what we wanted or brings something totally different. And now we kind of have to retrofit that to all the scripts that we've written previously. But also it's just this great freedom because the characters could be absolutely anything.
Right.
And we're like, we'll come up with a great joke and we'll be like, oh, is this a joke that character would say? And if we like the joke enough, yeah, it is. And now that's a whole new element to this character that didn't exist before. So it's all just uncharted territory. And then now we're actually filming. So we're incorporating what all the actors are bringing into it. And they've got ideas that are changing how we write for the characters. And me specifically, I'm actually the only writer in the room that has worked on a puppet show before. So I know most of the cast have a really good sense, or a pretty good sense, of who they are and what they can do performance-wise, but nobody else has that familiarity. And then there's one nobody knows. So she's a total wild card, and it's delightful because she's bringing all this new energy and just trying to discover what gifts she's bringing that we can use in the scripts.
Right.
So it's just been so much fun and a very, very different experience. Because it's the Wild West.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's gotta be tough, you know. It's gotta be really tough, kind of, you know.
No, but it's a great opportunity to explore and just make all these continued discoveries. Like that's,
and also like knowing when to push it more and knowing when to pull back, you know. Yeah, because especially those first couple ones being written must have been really tough, because especially writing on Sesame Street for so long, like, yeah, it's like, oh, you're writing for this character, you don't even know what it looks like. It's almost like, it's like, are they building it based on the script, or are you scripting based on the building? Like, it's so interesting. Was there any concept designs at all before that you saw, or anything?
We had sketches, but nothing actually built. And some of the sketches, one of the characters was still kind of, they were still going back and forth. And then, like, we didn't really have a sense of, we have one larger character, so we didn't really have much of a sense of scale either. So just like a sketch can only give you so much information anyway.
Well, even I imagine like knowing like whether a character is rotted or live hand could affect. Like, for example, like on Sesame Street, if you're going to make a mini band, you know, maybe Elmo's going to be the singer and Cookie Monster is going to be the drummer for obvious reasons for as far as puppetry goes. But as far as this show, it's like you wouldn't even really know how to assign it necessarily based on that. Well, that's interesting too.
Yeah, that actually was a problem. There were a couple characters that we didn't know if it was going to be a live hand or a rod hand. So we'd write gags and I'd be like, I'm not so sure about that. And then once we figured it out, it was a lot easier. But also, that's not a thing that most of the other writers have ever had to consider. Yeah. So, oh man, it's so great, but also just the worst being the only person in the room with that kind of puppet knowledge, because they would pitch these awesome jokes like, oh, this character is going to grab a pencil, notebook, then throw the pencil away, rip off the piece of paper, crumple it into a ball and throw it in the garbage. And everybody's laughing and you're just like, no, none of that can happen. What a nightmare. Yeah. And you don't want to be the puppet police. It's just like, hey guys, great joke. But what you're saying is just not ever going to happen. So
9 cutaways in a mini. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just had to sit there and hope that the joke died on its own.
Right.
Or you just have to sit there and I'm sure that I looked like a crazy person because they'd all be laughing. And then all of a sudden I'd retreat into my mind palace trying to think of how exactly that could be accomplished and not participating. And then just as soon as they move on, then I'm like, yay, I'm back. Right. But for those couple of minutes, I'm just like, oh God, no. Help.
You're actually, that's not how we do it here.
You know what a puppet is?
That is me every day.
Yeah, that's so funny. Now, before we go, we definitely wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done outside in returning to some live theater, because I believe, weren't you, and I know it was a project you worked on with Spencer a lot, weren't you guys the first people to get an O'Neill residency for puppetry?
It was a play that Spencer and I created. The show was currently calling it Frozen Valley. At the time, it was All We Have Left. And originally it was Now All We Have Left Is Each Other. But that is a little bit of a word salad. So it just kept getting trimmed down further and further. But the premise of the show is 2 young siblings who are, pardon me, left alone in their parents' roadside attraction after their parents kill themselves. So not a regular comedy that Spencer and I would normally work on, just kind of a dark magical realism play. And the cast members that we had Marty Robinson and Jen Barnhart. Sam Gold and Haley Jenkins were the siblings. Ariel Estrada was kind of the surprise villain. And it was just an amazing experience, just kind of being able to have the entire O'Neill to ourselves as we're developing this piece. And the style was really outside of what I normally get to work with. It was this dark magical realism style. So getting to play with puppets that look so different from, my day-to-day work was just really just such a joy, Yeah. Just kind of going back to my theatrical background a little more.
No, absolutely. I mean, it was, I've only had the benefit of seeing photos from it, but it just looked like a gorgeous design. And again, just to be with those people for 2 weeks must have been a pleasure, but to be creating something like that too, just must have been just a blast. So have you guys been able to continue working on it, or did it just inspire you guys to continue working on other things? What's been happening with it?
Right after we did the residency, we got to put it up at La Mama. The problem with that show is that it is physically huge because, we've got this giant frozen Iceman head that has to go somewhere. So the cast is pretty large, so it's not something that's really easy to just throw up and keep workshopping. And then, both Spencer and I kind of have started other big projects that have taken our attention away. I, got a job writing for a CBS sitcom that moved me out to LA. So I would still love to go back and revisit it. But for the time being, it's kind of where it's at now.
Sure.
But I feel like no project ever really dies. It just kind of has to sit for a little bit, and then we'll steal from it and use it to launch other projects, or some new bit of information. Let's bring that back. So
that's awesome.
It's on the back burner, I guess, but still hoping to play around with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great thing. I think that a lot of people need to keep in mind sometimes is that just because of one version of a project doesn't end up being, something that ends up on Broadway or whatever, you're still able to take everything what you learned, potentially reuse some of those puppets and put it towards something different that becomes greater than the sum of its parts, which is really inspiring.
Yeah, and I actually have been thinking recently just like how much I miss doing that theatrical work, because it is such a different itch to scratch than television work. Like there's just so much, and just the immediacy of it is such a joy. So actually really looking forward to doing more work like that again soon.
Certainly love to see it, and I'm sure plenty of people listening will want to check that out as well. But all right, so as we begin to wrap up, we can't have you go without gathering around the puppet campfire and sharing a great puppeteer story. So if you have anything that happened or things that weren't going right, but you look back now and we could all laugh about it a little bit.
Oh gosh, there's so many times things go wrong, but one that I remember specifically is I had just started working at Henson, like as a grown-up in charge of stuff on my own. And I spent a very long time making underpants, little, what are they called? Like not
pantaloons?
Onesies. Pantaloons, yeah. For a baby piglet, like with the little, or underoos, tiny little underoos for an actual piglet. And, like even a little tail pole, a little matching tank top. And I was so proud of him. I was like, I did an adult. And then the shoot was like 2 days later. But it turns out that piglets grow extremely fast.
Oh, no.
Oh.
So the whole underoo set just didn't fit. So Jason Weber had to remake a pair that next day. And all my work was for nothing.
Oh, no.
They couldn't just get a new pig?
Yeah.
Garbage.
What?
Because a stupid piglet.
Yeah.
So that's a good life lesson. Those guys grow fast. So keep that in mind when making them tiny clothes.
That's what's nice about building clothes for puppets.
Yeah.
They won't grow out of it.
It wasn't like the John Barrymore of piglets. They could have any other piglet.
Right.
We really want this
Garbage.
piglet.
Yeah.
You can sew it. Yeah.
He's a friend of the family. He always wanted to be on TV. His whole family turned into bacon. We gotta throw him a bone.
He had a three picture deal. Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, so that's awesome. So what's the best way for people to follow your work you're doing? Any Instagram places to follow you?
Oh, I am garbage at social media, so I am on Facebook, but that's pretty much it. The most reliable way to stay up to date is to be Facebook friends with my mom. She's always the one posting
all right
stuff that I do.
As long as your mom's okay with that.
Kathy Hara, she's a delight.
Yeah.
Well, Liz Hara, thank you so much for joining us on Puppeteers. It was so good to join you in your bathtub, apparently. Almost forgot to mention that.
I was just like, everyone else has these cool workshop spaces, and I do not. So I was like, I'm just going to do something weird.
Love it.
That's right. Well, you certainly did.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and it was really good catching up with you, and look forward to seeing you sometime soon.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. This was so much fun.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Liz. Bye.
Puppeteers podcast is made possible thanks to all of our friends at Patreon who've supported us, including our newest Patreon patrons, Jake Thompson, Vanessa Warner, Jan King, Lauren Taylor, and Christopher Harris. If you're interested in supporting Puppeteers, you can go to puppeteers.com/support. You can make a one-time pledge or become a monthly supporter with access to exclusive content and early episodes of the show. And thanks to all who keep listening to Puppeteers Pod.